Hello, and welcome to a special episode of the Oh No, No, No podcast. I am Duncan Cameron. Rather than chatting with a bunch of idiots about who the Rovers are going to be turning over this weekend, instead I am sitting down with the chair of the Raith Supporters Trust. We've got Alan Russell for a bit of a blather about the trust itself. So, Alan, first of all, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks, Duncan. Just have to let your listeners in on a secret. You're talking to one Egypt tonight. So you've not avoided the Egypts, you've just got a different one.
Well, listen, a change is as good as a rest.
Absolutely.
So we'll jump straight in. As I say, the purpose of this is really just to have a little bit of blather about the trust and the sort of purpose behind it, and really the role that it plays in the current kind of wider Raith Rover universe. So let's start with a big easy question first of all. What is the Raith Supporters Trust?
Well, I'll go even further back into basics. What is a supporters trust in general? It's something that's been around for about 30 years. Started off south of the border. Northampton Town was the first supporters trust, and it was someone who wanted a way for fans to own shares collectively, one member, one vote, along cooperative democratic principles. And he took a legal structure that was there for mainly for the financial sector, really. So building societies were structured along this way, and it's quite an old-fashioned, arcane structure. At the time, it was called an Industrial and Provident Society. He says, well, why don't we use that for a football supporters organisation so that we can take a shareholding in our club? So it was the first one, and the idea kind of flew for a few years after that, where a lot of trusts were set up, usually when the clubs were in crisis. And then after a few years, groups of supporters around the UK started saying, well, our club isn't in crisis yet, but we kind of have a suspicion that we're teetering on the brink. So we'll set up one now before we're in crisis, just in case we need it. And that's how the Raith Trust was set up back in, I think, 2001, 2002. For those of you who were fans around that time, you'll remember the kind of things that were going on. We'd been in the Premier, we'd dropped out of the Premier with a massive debt. We'd had a massive wage bill to try and stay in the Premier, and it didn't work out. We're back in, it wasn't the Championship at the time, Division 1 at the time, and the club seemed to be in a bit of a mess. So a few people got round saying, well, why don't we try this supporters trust thing and set one up here? So they did in 2001, 2002. We got ourselves organised, got a legal structure, got ready, started to look at what might be on the horizon, and that horizon was looming, ever closer and ever bleaker. And when there was threats by the owners of the clubs, or maybe ideas by the owners of the club at the time, to build houses on Starks Park, and they separated the ownership of the stadium from the football club, we thought we're glad we started to set this up. We probably need to keep our foot on the floor on this one and go as hard as we can. Until 2004, when we were in the real crisis and set up the Reclaim the Rovers campaign, we had a ready-made legal structure for if we managed to raise funds to buy shares on behalf of all supporters. And again, it's those democratic one member, one vote, one fan, one vote principles. So nobody controls them. Those shares are everyone's who's a member of the trust. Anybody can join for a small fee, and allowed us to basically say, well, there's an alternative here. And we were able to take a fairly small share in the club. We had to get above 10% to get what we thought was the meaningful level where we could get a seat on the board on behalf of the fans, which we managed to achieve by the end of 2005 when the takeover went through, and everybody kind of was singing it from the rooftops that we've saved the club and we're a community club now. So that's what the trust did. It was created to serve that purpose, and then once you've got the shareholding, we still exist so that we still hold that shareholding and can actually do our statutory duty as shareholders on behalf of everyone that's put money in over those 25 years, but also so that we can use that shareholding to get influential conversations with whoever's in charge of the club any day, week, month, season, decade. And that's what we've been doing ever since. So that's really what we're for. I always call it boring but important stuff. We don't really talk about football that much. We've all got an opinion on football. We've got an opinion on who we should be signing, what manager we should have, whether we should be playing a 4-1-3-2, or whether we should be signing 6'7" Faroese strikers or not. So we've got opinions of those as fans, but really what we're there to do is talk about what does our shareholding get us in terms of influence, and how do we help everyone else at the club to build a stronger Raith Rovers. So nowadays, what the trust is really about, and it says it as part of our logo, every time you see the trust on signs, banners, photos, wherever around the stadium, it says working together for a stronger Raith Rovers. That's what we're doing. And the big part together is, together we're doing it with anybody who shares that view, that goal for a stronger Raith Rovers, whether we agree with them or not, whether we like what they're doing or not, whether they've got power or not. And it is work, really, to do that. It doesn't come easily, because every football club's trying to be as strong as they can, and the league table can only place one team at the top, and somebody's got to finish bottom. So we're trying to make it that it's not us that finishes bottom, and if it does, it's not a crisis.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's just a point that people miss, or not people miss. It's fundamentally, it's very obvious, but it is that thing in a 10-team league. Someone's got to finish bottom, and you should really prepare for that. At the start of the season, setting aside other things, there's a 1 in 10 chance it could be you. And it's interesting you said there about the trusts in general. They tend to be sort of born out of crisis, or at least the possibility of crisis. And it sounds a little bit like the Raith Trust as well. It kind of started off as firefighting, but now it sounds more like kind of like fire marshals, almost like putting the safety measures in place so that there's less chance of a fire, as opposed to kind of putting it out once it's started.
I'd agree absolutely with that, and I think it's not just the Supporters Trust that does that. It's the whole idea of fan engagement. At its very basics, it's getting as many people involved in the conversation so you can share the load, you can share responsibility, and you can share the glory when things go well, but you can also share a bit of responsibility if things don't go so well. And clubs generally that do well are ones that engage well with their fans, and the contrary is true as well. If you don't engage well with your fans, if you don't listen to them, or if you don't even let them into the conversation, it tends to go pretty badly. Just in the news today, there's talk of Inverness Cali maybe going into administration the decade after, getting to cup finals. And you can see over the last sort of 5 or 6, 7 years since they left the Premiership, the people running the club have distanced themselves from the supporters. And that only goes one direction. Only ends up in one horrible mess. And I hope it doesn't end up in a horrible mess for them, but they're teetering on the brink because they basically alienated their fan base. And that's what we want to prevent happening. And it's not just down to the trust, but we're active in that way, and we think a lot about fan engagement on the boring but important things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you said yourself, it's and I repeated that it tends to come from moments of crisis, but Calais is a great example that you're probably never more than about 18 months away from crisis, depending on the cards falling a certain way. So it's an interesting way to look at it, as in that sort of prevention's better than cure side of things, making sure that the engagement is there from the beginning to try and avoid kind of problems further down the line. Quite a functional question, just as something you mentioned there. I'm going to take you perilously close to talking about the corporate structure of Raith Rovers, I'm afraid.
Yes. Everybody's switching off now. They've seen my pie charts before.
I was going to say, I mean, to be fair, if you want to see some very illustrative pie charts, it's the best way I've ever seen it done. But I mean, probably not rivaling any blockbusters. But taking the kind of overall group as a collection of various shell companies, what is the approximate trust holding? What's the sort of ownership of Raith Rovers, of the trust, at this moment in time?
I mean, it's not an exact science, but if you assume that every share in each of the 4 companies that make up Raith Rovers is worth the same, so if the notional value on each share of £1, our shareholding is now equivalent to about 4% of the club. Up until 2017, it was worth about 14% of the club, and the change in ownership structure back then, where the shareholdings of New Raith Rovers passed to Stark Park Properties, essentially diluted every shareholder, apart from Stark Park Properties shares, to a quarter of what they were before. So we went from about 14% of the club to about 3.5%. We've invested more shares since then, and it's up to about 4%. So it's not really a meaningful shareholding in itself, but it's still one of the larger shareholdings at the club, and gives us, basically a seat at a table. Or if we phone up somebody at the club, running the club, and want a conversation, they tend to listen to us. We're not irrelevant, but we're not as relevant as we once were.
And is that priority for you, trying to increase that shareholding again?
It may not be possible to increase it greatly in the short term. It's always a priority. I mean, it's always something that we're looking at. We're looking for opportunities to do that. It's not always easy to do that. Until recently, there were no unissued shares in Raith Rovers, so all the shares were issued. And in the last AGM, they approved an increase in the share capital, converted some loans, some of them from ours and some from other significant shareholders, converted loans, soft loans, essentially loans that weren't going to be recalled, into shares. So we increased our shareholding through that route. We had a conversation in the last year with the new board about a potential investment. We had an offer from one of our members to put money in if it was available, and the answer was really not now, because any significant increase in our shareholding would have diluted the new consortium's shareholding below 50%, which they didn't want. We completely understood that, respect that, and we still have a conversation about everything else we can do. And there's some money that sits in the trust bank account that we're talking about investing in the club, probably not in terms of in return for shares for the same reason, but investing it in things that both improve the image of the club and the supporter experience on match day. So looking at opportunities, so what makes a difference to every fan when they go in that stadium on a Saturday afternoon or Tuesday night or whenever, and also what are the things that make the club look like the kind of club we think it is, and it genuinely does seem to be, over the last year to 18 months, a club that really puts its fans first, and really values fan engagement. So we're talking with the consortium that are running the club about those ideas as well. So yeah, we'd always look at increasing our shareholding, either in the football club or in the stadium. And again, we've had conversations since the takeover last year with John Sem about what's his long-term plan, and are there other things we can do there. And John's also said that he's kind of happy with his shareholding as it is, doesn't particularly want to dilute it. He sees that as part of his part of who he is. He's part of Raith Rovers, and doesn't particularly want to let go of that at the moment. But we have good conversations with both John and the consortium running the football club about what that could look like in future. So when there's an opportunity to do it, and also when there's really a need to do it, then those are things that we'd absolutely be up for.
And on that subject of the kind of the incoming board, I suppose, I don't think we can still call them incoming at the moment, the incumbent board.
Still feels fresh after many years of them not being around.
How would you describe that relationship and that sort of communication between yourselves and the current board?
It's been absolutely superb. It goes right back to the night before the deal, the takeover was announced, or the investment was announced. And they invited all the supporters groups to join them in the Raith Suite to talk about what was going to happen the following day, what was going to be announced to the press. So the first thing they did was talk to supporters, and they've really maintained that tone throughout. I remember, 5 or 6 weeks later, they got volunteers together again in the Raith Suite just to for an afternoon of just chatting about what everybody does, introducing themselves, getting to know people, and also getting people's ideas about what they thought might be possible. And on that afternoon, I was standing. Dean McKenzie was standing over in the corner. Nobody was talking to him. I don't know if everybody was shy or just busy, or if they knew everybody else more than knew him. I went over and just said hello, introduced myself, and I was asking how the projects that literally 5 weeks before they'd announced they wanted to do a lot of work in the main stand. I said, "Oh, how's it going?" He said, "Come down and have a look." So we wandered downstairs and had a look. Just the two of us wandered down, had a look at what was basically the interior of a building site. And as we were down there, he was saying more about their plans for how they wanted to change the club and what they wanted to do. Even tell me about players that had left the club and why. Basically sharing an awful lot of information. And he'd never met me before. He didn't know much about me, but kind of all he needed to know was I was a supporter. and he was happy to share. And that tone of trust has been brilliant. And I meet with Andrew Barman mostly through the last 15, 16 months since then. And we sit down, and I think it's going to be a half an hour conversation, and an hour and a half later we're still chatting, and there's more and more things we want to talk about. So they've always got time for a conversation, which is fantastic. I think the other thing to really say, people maybe don't realise this. I think a lot of people think that the Trust and other supporters groups don't like John Sim or we're his enemy. But I've had loads and loads of conversations with John Sim. We meet up for a coffee when he's back in Scotland. Talk about all sorts of stuff. He's quite candid. He shares quite a lot of information. So we have a good conversation. There's loads of stuff we don't agree on. We've had some very difficult conversations over the years about certain things that you probably can guess what they are, and been quite forthright about our views that we're representing, his views that he's trying to put forward about why things are done a certain way at the club. But we always keep on talking. So there's a level of trust with a small t when people at the club talk to the Trust with a big T.
Good. It's good to hear. I think it's that the communication has to be the starting point. It's becomes very difficult for everyone when you don't have those sort of open lines, and that's again goes back to what you said before about if you pick up the phone, someone will answer, which is nice. And that's whether the shareholding's 3% or 6% or 9%. Fundamentally, if the communication's there, that's going to be a key starting point. To go back to something else you said there about, I'm putting words in your mouth slightly, but in terms of like priorities, and it's not necessarily like, waking up every morning trying to increase the shareholding. To what extent would you say that I think this might be a bit of a misconception that it's not just about all the big picture all the time. You're not constantly just wrangling about ownership structure and all that kind of stuff. How much of an involvement does the Trust have in more day-to-day sort of operational improvements like you mentioned before?
We were talking just now about where the right places are where we could sort of co-invest in something, develop something together. We had lots of ideas about the things that was, with shares not being on the table for purchase just now, we don't want to just sit with our money and sitting in a bank account, and with the current inflation rates, it actually loses value every year. So we actually want that money to go into the club and be spent on something that's of long-term value to supporters and to our members and to the club, essentially. So we've been talking about what that might look like. We don't want to get in the way of any other plans that are already in train, but we talked about a couple of things that might be priorities for the club, and trying to figure out what would be the right thing to spend money on right now. And I hope I'm not sort of like breaching any sort of confidences here, but one of the things we'd actually spoken during the pandemic about improved disabled facilities, and had a look around there, and there was drawings being made about turning a section of the south stand into a better disabled viewing facility for wheelchair users, more elevated, more under shelter, and with better access to both outside of the ground and into bathrooms and things like that. And so we kind of approached the Andrew Barman and the rest of the board this season, or sort of tail end of last season, said, would that be possible? And actually their plan is, when we eventually are able to do something with the railway stand, that would include that kind of facility. And they're very kind of open and trusting, and they're very thoughtful about how to spend other people's money as well as their own. So they said, we don't want to spend your money on that here if we're going to do something about that there. It might be a year's time, it might be 2 years' time, it might be 3 years' time. Probably depends when we get to the Premier, when, not if. But when we do that, that's probably the big project that maybe get done then. So we'd rather wait and do that then. We'd like to make some improvements to disabled viewing experience in the short term, but it's probably not going to be that. So we said, well, what else is there? And that's where the conversation goes. So it's back and forward and looking at things that might be of real value. And some of them are not the glamorous things. So a big gripe of supporters is there's no hot water in the south stand bathrooms to wash your hands, particularly on a winter's day, because sometimes the only way of getting a heat other than the nuclear temperature coffee and Bovril that they sell in the catering stand. So no hot water there. So it's like, oh, what would it take to get hot water in all the toilets? So that's one of the ideas that we're talking about. So, could that work? And that would be something we think we could probably go to our members and say, well, we've got this money sitting in the bank. We don't want it to sit in the bank. We want it to get used in the club. This is something that will benefit you, us, the club. So, is this reasonable? So it's that kind of conversation, but it's a back and forward all the time to see what's happening. I think the truth is, over the last year, I don't know how they've achieved everything that they've achieved off the pitch as well as on the pitch. There's a massive amount of work gets done. A lot of people have seen it on the videos that the club have released, and we don't want to slow them down the progress on that and distract them with something that's not on this critical path or the top priority list. It's kind of biding our time and wait to see what's needed next.
And how obviously you said that your relationship is a very positive one with the new board. Has their presence sort of changed the tone of the conversation, sort of within the trust or within the trust board? Has the kind of DEFCON level changed at all?
It was never at DEFCON 5 all the time. It occasionally creep up there. It hasn't crept up there in the last year, and it probably is. A lot of that's driven by football. When things are going well on the pitch, nobody is really pushing the panic button. And actually, within the conversation in the trust board, just the last couple of months, none of us were pushing the panic button when the manager was changed after one league game of the season. We were like, took everyone by surprise, us included. But we're all like, okay, well, they seem to have a plan, and they've had a plan with everything else, and it's kind of worked out so far. So, yeah, that's probably all right. But let's just check in with them fairly regularly and find out what's going on. So yeah, it's not be panicking, but we've not had to panic about anything. I think if they got something badly wrong, and everybody does eventually, nobody makes 100% of their decisions right. When something goes wrong, we'll see how the tone of the conversation is there. But all the signs are is that they're good, sensible people that are open to a conversation about anything, whether you're in full alignment, whether you agree, whether you disagree, they'll talk to you about it. So yeah, it's changed a little bit, but most of the time with previous regimes, it's been an okay conversation. Sometimes only okay, sometimes terrible, but usually okay.
Yeah, it depends on the matter at hand, I imagine.
Aye.
I've got some questions here that are all along the same lines. They're all biggest questions, but let's start with, tell me what you think the Trust's biggest achievements have been since its inception.
So, obviously, the biggest one that you can put a number to is the amount that we've invested in the club. We've invested about £230,000 in the club over the years. It shares in New Raith Rovers and Raith Rovers Holdings Limited and Raith Rovers Football Club Limited. So our shareholders are about 230,000. We've also put money into the club in other ways through sponsoring advertising boards and various things that we've done over the years. So that's the big one that is really key to us. I think the one we're probably most proud of is the things that we've done around the experience for kids. So the Rotary Club, it wasn't our idea. Stephen Lother came up with the idea and implemented most of it, but we co-funded that with Stephen's company over the last 10 to 15 years. And we looked around the stand on Saturdays, and there wasn't all that many kids in the place. I think at its peak, the Rotary Club had 500 members, most of whom were coming at least 5 times a season, and a lot of them were coming every game of the season, each one dragging an adult along with them to get in, and that was fantastic to see. And the other one around young supporters. At one point, not that long ago, season tickets for primary school age kids at Raith Rovers were the third most expensive in Scotland, behind Rangers and Celtic only. We campaigned about that. We kind of investigated what was going on. We looked at best practice elsewhere, presented that to the board. We seemed to do it every year for 2 or 3 years and didn't really make a difference. Then the price went up, and we were very fortunate that the price went up and it hit that point where it was the third most expensive in Scotland. And one of our members had passed away and left us money in his estate. And checking in with friends and family of his, we offered to subsidise the cost of kids' season tickets, bringing them down from I think it was £75 to £25 for the first a few hundred season tickets. The club gladly accepted that offer, and it really boosted the experience, and the pricing never went back up again afterwards. So that was the thing that we thought, that's going to make the biggest long-term difference of anything we'll ever do as a trust. Because almost every fan starts supporting when they're about that age, and they get taken to the game by an older family member. And if you can make that less of a financial barrier for a kid to start going to the games in their first season, and keep them there and keep them going back, and if the badger you to go back every single week, it's not a problem. Usually after 3 or 4 games, sometimes after the first season, they're hooked. Some of them they've had enough after that amount of time, but most of them are hooked after that length of time. So that has been a massive thing that we feel we achieved. So yeah, we're very, very proud of that. We think that's probably had the biggest influence it has. The other bit that's not such a happy story is the way that we felt we needed to speak up and represent supporters' views in a couple of difficult times at the club. The one 2 years ago when David Goodwillie was signed, we acted very, very quickly just to test whether our views were consistent with our members and the wider support. There's probably 90% of the people that responded to the questions we were asking in those first few hours said, yeah, we feel broadly the same as you. So we put out a statement that's saying, we're against this decision in the strongest terms we could, and we want to help the club get through it. We didn't want to string people up against from the nearest lamppost. We didn't call for anybody's head. We wanted to help the club work through it, so that people would take responsibility and think about it, and we would never be in that position again. So we had to do that, and I think we did pretty well with doing that. And we managed to keep relationships alive from doing that, because they're difficult, really difficult conversations to have. But throughout it, we were meeting, talking regularly with John Sim and other members of the board, Stephen McDonald, who was chair at the time, talking about it, trying to get our way through it, disagreeing, very, very strongly a lot of the time, but keeping at the table, keeping talking. Similarly, about 5 years before that, 2017, when the shareholding passed from New Raith Rovers to Stark Park Properties, effectively diluting our shareholding, we put some structure to some of the conversations having there. We came up with a list of questions that we wanted answered before that change in shareholding happened, stumbling blocks that we thought were there that needed to be worked through. We got answers to some of them, but not all of them. But again, we kept talking all the way through it, and putting in those really tough hours at some of the times when it's not much fun to be a football supporter or a Raith Rovers supporter, or just to have any association with the club. We kind of gritted our teeth and got through it, and got through on the other side, where it's much, much better. It's always much, much better on the other side of the storm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it's about being a constant in that sense.
Yeah.
And as you say, I appreciate that the trust is a sort of concentrated body, but you are there fundamentally to represent the wider support, I suppose, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
You literally represent your members as a democratic body, but you kind of stand for everyone, really.
That's right. Yeah, whether people are members or not, we never close the door. We would never not listen to them. And when there's big things like that going out there, we put the statement out publicly. We don't just put it in email to our members and ask them to respond to our survey. We put it out to everybody. So yeah, whether they're members or not, we try to speak up for what people's interests are. We don't get it right all the time, and we can't represent everybody. So on those difficult issues, as I said, sort of 90% seem to agree with what we were saying about the David Goodwillie signing. 10% really disagreed with us. Some of our members disagreed with us and left the trust, but far more joined the trust as a result of that, because saying, you do speak for us, keep on going, almost giving us that tacit support, saying, well, keep on going with that. A year later, when it comes around to renewal time, not everybody renews. That's fine. And we've got no problem with that. People can join and leave and join and leave. We prefer everybody to be a member of the trust, so we can genuinely say we speak for everybody. But even if we don't, we're always listening to them, and we try to pitch the tone right, so that we're not going off on a tangent and becoming a weird niche organisation that has got very, very strange interests. We do have very, very strange interests, as those people that have seen my spreadsheets and pie charts would attest to. My data visualisations about the roller coaster and attendance trends over 141 years of history and all that rubbish.
Well, somebody's got to be putting that stuff together, and I'm just glad it's not me, to be perfectly honest with you. So that's really interesting, the kind of biggest achievements. Let's turn that slightly. What would you say your biggest concerns are currently in relation to the wider Rovers situation?
About the Rovers? No big concerns at the moment.
To be fair, if you want to expand that to a wider kind of football point, it's interesting if that's where your mind goes.
Yeah, you've opened the door for me. That's it's kind of a place I often want to go. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But in Rovers terms, and it's something you mentioned earlier, any club's only 18 months away from a real black hole. Your fortunes can change very, very quickly. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. If we can do anything that helps that be less likely. And also, if we see the warning signs ahead, we're able to help the club and all pull together to get out of that situation. Doesn't seem to be any sign of that happening just now. And one of the things I do that looks at wider football. So I've got a couple of roles in football outside of Raith and outside of the Raith Trust. So I'm the executive director of Supporters Direct Scotland. So we look across Scottish football and give support to supporters trusts across the country. One of the projects I've been doing there actually grew. It's how I got involved in Supporters Direct personally. How I got involved in Supporters Direct Scotland in the first place was that, having done the pie charts about Raith Rovers' ownership structure, they asked me if I'd lead a project to look at who owns the rest of Scottish football. So Supporters Direct Scotland now have something called the SDS Index, which I put together and maintain, that basically says here's who owns every club in Scotland. You can see the shareholding, you can see the power balance, you can monitor changes. When a club announces it's been taken over and it's got a new investor who holds all the cards, I basically follow it through and say, has it actually happened? And there's a few clubs, and they're all noted on this publicly published data visualization for anyone who wants to take a look. They're all noted there. It says, well, on 23rd of November 2022, this club announced this. It's not happened yet. It's not been reported to Companies House yet. And there's a few clubs that are like that who kind of are publicly saying their structure is one thing, but it's not really happened yet. Another project I do within Supporters Direct Scotland, I've just been starting this over the last year, is looking at the profitability of Scottish football clubs. It's something I'd wanted to do for a long, long time. So it's fairly hot off the press. I've now got all but one club in the SPFL for season 2022-23 and charted their profit or loss. And in that season, only 8 clubs in Scotland made a profit.
I was going to say, that's a lot of red ink going into that project, I suspect.
The 8 that made a profit, 6 of them made a fairly small profit. One club made a massive profit. Celtic made 35 million of profit that season. They've got 100 million in the bank. Their profit, that one club's profit, could wipe out the loss for that season of every other club in Scotland. The 34 clubs that made a loss, most of them made a bigger loss than the few clubs that made a profit that weren't Celtic. So Scottish football's in a really poor state in terms of profitability. The last 4 teams that got promoted from the Championship did so making 7-figure losses for that season. To win the Championship, it loses you a huge amount of money. Raith Rovers have never lost anything like that amount of money in a single season than the clubs that have got promoted. So the task of getting promoted out the Championship to the Premiership is massive. And if we'd managed to do it last season on what I think would be a modest profit or a very, very small loss, it would have been miraculous. And we were 180 minutes away from doing it. So we're in really good shape, or we're really lucky. We want to make sure we're in good shape, not luck. But so my position in Supporters Direct Scotland, looking at that kind of stuff, helps me see some of the warning signs for Scottish football, and Raith Rovers aren't immune to that. And it gives me access to conversations about improving Scottish football, as well as the Raith Trust working towards a stronger Raith Rovers. So involved some conversations with the SFA, the SPFL and Scottish Government about enhancing Scottish football and making it better, fixing some of these structural problems. And then the other organisation I'm involved with is Football Supporters Europe. So I was invited to join their board last year to lead their division on, it used to be called Fan Ownership and Heritage Protection. It's now called Governance and Representation. So they look at what's happening in Scotland and they say, Scotland is quite unusual when you look at a European context for the amount of fan ownership that exists here and the relationship that fans have with their clubs and the decision makers in their game and they look at that, it's a good way. They look at it, we're unusual in a good way. We've got the highest level of match-going support of any country in Europe, so they want to kind of like learn from that. So they invited me through my Supporters Direct Scotland role onto the board to lead the vision. At the board level, I'm not doing the work there, but that gives me some access to what's happening elsewhere. And the bigger leagues in Europe are basket cases.
Yes.
They're almost beyond saving. So when these conversations I have with the SFA, SPFL, Scottish Government about enhancing Scottish football, the point I make is government south of the border have had to step in and regulate football because it's so beyond saving itself. It doesn't have the access to actually change things and make the game fairer. We've got an opportunity to do that up in Scotland. Doesn't happen automatically, but if you can get everybody around the table, it's possible. So I play a role in that as well. And I like to think that what I've learned over the bad times at Raith Rovers helps inform the conversations I have there. But if we don't fix things, there's only one way things generally go. The big clubs get bigger and richer, the money gets concentrated in fewer hands, and those who don't have it kind of suffer. Player development suffers, community development suffers, the support experience suffers. There'll always be football. I mean, I'd go and watch, 7 kids kicking around a tin can, playing 3 and in. But I'd rather be watching Raith Rovers and Dylan Easton putting on a show and all the great stuff we get to see at the moment. But it's all at risk if we get it wrong as a club or as a country.
It's really interesting, and I saw last week if Celtic win a Champions League game, they get more prize money for that single match than the Rovers got for the whole of last season's league prize money.
Oh yeah.
So is that presumably then that's just it's redistribution of the kind of income streams that you're kind of shooting towards there?
That's right. Yes, there's a big part of it, and I think that one of the things that Scottish football doesn't get much credit for, and it happened for the wrong reason, I would say, but the distribution of wealth in Scottish football pre-2012 was way worse, in my view, worse. It was very different than it is today. So back then, prize money in Scottish football, 96% of that was shared amongst the top tier. Nowadays, it's 82%. So we're giving 18. We're spreading the pie of from domestic football prize money. 18% of it goes to the lower leagues, and more of it filters down to the third tier, the fourth tier, and now into the pyramid than before. But the actual amount that filters down to the fifth tier and below is pennies compared to the millions, tens of millions that's at the top. So we're miles away from where we could be, but we're way better than we were just 12 years ago. So that's a really positive move. And I kind of we at Supporters Direct Scotland, we wrote a paper back in 2011 when the Rangers crisis was happening about that's when the SPL and the SFL merged. So there's a paper. It was the fans model, the fans idea about how it could be structured. So we proposed a redistribution model for the money that had 67% of the money staying in the top tier and the rest of it getting filtered down. But also within divisions, it's more even as well. So if you finish first in the championship versus 12th in the championship, the differential is quite big. So we wanted to flatten out that a little bit, flatten the one at every division and also between divisions. And then I think if you're able to do that, and they went a long way to getting towards what we proposed. So I think they did a fantastic job that they don't get very much credit for. But if you can flatten that out, then it's not a crisis if you get relegated. Relegation is normal. So we've got the smallest divisions. Hardly any country in the world has got smaller divisions than we have in Scotland. We've got more relegation and promotion places, automatic and playoff places than anybody else. And most seasons with 2 or 3 games left to go, everybody could go up or down. Most teams could do both. But everyone's at risk of relegation or promotion. The steps going up are too steep. So when Brecon City went up a few years ago, and they did a good thing in saying, well, the players that got us up are going to have a chance at keeping us in the championship. It went horribly wrong. 3 successive relegations, and they end up in the Highland League for 4 years, 5 years, however long it is now. When clubs go down a division, they have to completely destroy all the hard work they've been doing for years. And I think that really came into focus at the end of the COVID season when Hearts and Partick took Scottish football to the High Court about the damage that was done to them by going down a division. Now, Hearts have been in the Premier for years and years and years, never thought about the club going down and what a crisis it was for the club going down until it was them. So every club has got a job to do in the good times to stop it being so bad in the bad times. And it's trying to get Scottish football as a whole to think of it as a game of fairness, as a game where you can make the pie bigger if you do it a certain way. Or you can hoard all the riches at the top and make hay while the sun shines. But wait till the clouds come.
So I always found that very odd, the kind of voting structure in the top flight, and in the way that the teams keep voting to protect it. And the thing, it's a matter of fact that one of you is going to be outside of this by the time it comes round.
Yeah.
Now, as you say, because of the kind of tight nature, especially with the bottom six post-split, nobody thinks it's going to be them.
Yeah.
But it's
there are very few clubs that have never been relegated. So they're by the grace of God. And you've got to look at that and say, well, as you said earlier, 18 months away from crisis. If you get things wrong, the cards can topple pretty rapidly. The number of big clubs that have found themselves in League One in recent years, and it's a difficult league to get out of. So you just keep things going well for ourselves, so it's not us. But in the meantime, make it a little bit less shit for the ones that it does happen to. And it's better, because it's better when Dunfermline come back and we get derbies again, except for the one a few weeks ago. It's great when Falkirk come back up to the Championship and we can scud them after their 43-game unbeaten run. It's fantastic. You want teams to be able to come back up again, but come back up in decent shape.
Yeah, and you're bang on about that. Just like a flatter distribution model would just takes. I mean, I was having a look that the Rovers picked up £630,000 as their league prize money last season. Airdrie get 430,000, so basically like 40 or 50% more for finishing 2 places ahead of them.
Yeah.
Which, as we've seen in the Championship, 2 places can be 4 goals.
Yeah.
Over the course of a 36-game season.
Absolutely, it can be hitting the post with the last kick of the ball in a match, and you're a league place below or 2 league places below. Yeah.
And it's even more stark, as you say, in the top flight, but then they do have all the money, so I'm slightly less.
Yeah, they have all the money, but almost every club that's up there loses money every season, and the clubs that are trying to get up there, the last 3-4 seasons have all lose money trying to get there, and it's like it doesn't make any sense. And once they're there, they can fix it, but they don't. So there's my soapbox.
It's interesting, and it's actually. Personally, it's a little bit reassuring that when I ask you what the biggest problems are, you don't immediately have a big Raith Rovers list at the top of your mind. I feel like there would have been some points over the last kind of 10, 15 years where there would have been like, how long have you got? This is a problem. This is a problem. It's quite nice to actually just be worrying about kind of Scottish football's wider problems, first and foremost. Well, on a similar note then, what would you say, these are the last of my biggest questions, what would you say that your biggest aims for the Trust? Let's say kind of, well, actually no, up to kind of medium to long term, but feel free to answer that anyway.
Yeah, well, what I would like, the biggest one is for fan engagement to be a permanent and structured part of the club. So the club thinks of fans integrally in every decision that it makes, and we have some sort of structural way to ensure that that's always the case. Increasing our shareholding is one way of doing that, and if we could ever get our shareholding to the point where we're owning the majority of the club, we'd be owning the club, so we could decide how it runs. But short of that, making fan engagement an integral part of the way the club runs, and structuring that way in a way that's permanent. And I think the club at the moment, people running the club are open to a lot of those ideas, so we're in a good place with that. I think the other big priority for me, aspiration for the Trust, is that we grow our membership and also diversify it a little bit. So it's most of our members have been members for years and years and years. So when we started the Trust up in 2001, a lot of people joined then. We're a lot younger than they are today. I mean, I joined then, and I was certainly a lot younger than I was than I am today. But we've got an aging membership. and we find it quite hard to appeal to younger supporters. So we need to get our messaging right to actually get them to understand, who we are and what we do. And it doesn't come naturally to most of us that are on the trust board, because most of us are in that demographic ourselves. I mean, I don't really do social media at all. I've got profiles on Twitter and Facebook, but it tires me out, it confuses me, and I'm too busy with my work, as well as all the things I mentioned earlier that I do essentially in my spare time, to take time with that. So it doesn't really come naturally to do it well. So we need to kind of crack that nut and find some help to do that. And it's one of the things probably put in an appeal through your podcast. If anybody loves doing social media, come and help us, because we hate it. We're not very good at it. And it's getting that message across to that younger potential membership. And I think the other thing we need to do is keep on helping the club be a great place for even younger fans to come. So the first shirt they buy is a Rovers shirt, or the first shirt they're given is a Rovers shirt. The first match that they go to is a Rovers match. The team they support is Raith Rovers. And I think that bit will help us all sleep easier at night, because we know there's somebody coming to fill our seats when we're no longer in them. So I think those are the kind of the short, medium, long-term aspirations, is try and work on those things. And I guess the other bit is on football. I mean, I don't talk about actual football all that much, but it's try and help the club keep on this run that we're on, where things are getting better on the park all the time. And when we get little blips, they're just little blips, because that's really, it makes it easier to do the boring but important things when you can go into a room and sit down with somebody at the football club and have a laugh, or go, oh, that goal the other weekend, or the atmosphere going up to Tannadice in the match last season, or oh geez, what was it like being in the yellow wall at Dingwall? Starting a conversation like that makes it much easier to then talk about the more difficult things. So try and keep that going, so it just makes these conversations just enjoyable and interesting and easier to have.
Yeah, definitely. That I suppose is a fundamental of the whole thing, is that everybody is pulling in the same direction. Well, certainly has the same end goal, which is the most successful Raith Rovers you can possibly have. And there's always going to be disagreements in terms of how to get there. But yeah, I think it's very important that there is a strong supporter's voice as part of that conversation. Just on the point you mentioned there about kind of permanent fan engagement, a permanent sort of position there. So that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think previously there was a supporters director seat on the board. Is that not the case at present?
That's right. Yeah. Well, we still have a seat on the board of New Raith Rovers, but it's effectively New Raith Rovers doesn't do anything. It holds a shareholding in the club, but it's not an active board. So we don't have a company director at Raith Rovers Football Club Limited, which is what we really mean by a supporters director. So I'd love to get that back. I hope over time, when the new board talk to us, that they don't see that as a threat, or don't see that as being something that would be a negative. It'd actually be a positive thing, because I think it was for many years. It was over the Goodwillie decision that Andy Mill resigned from the board, and Dot, who we elected in his place, was never invited onto the board of the companies, other than New Raith Rovers, where we have the significant shareholding that entitles us to a seat on the board. I understand the current board's view on it, that they want to keep the board just to themselves, so they can implement their plan without distractions, I guess. I don't know, but I don't think it would be a distraction to have a supporter on the board in the room with them, helping to shape that, and being a voice of the supporters within that. So a supporters director is a big part of that. So when I talk about permanent structures for fan engagement, there's a hierarchy of it, from fan ownership or a significant shareholding that's not majority ownership, but is a significant shareholding, a seat on the board, so you're part of those strategic conversations before they happen, rather than being told about them afterwards. There's a process that I talk about called structured dialogue, which means there's like a permanent structure that says this group of people meets on a quarterly basis to talk about this, with a set agenda, with visibility of certain things that are going on at the football club. And my version of that I kind of suggested last year to the board that they were interested in, but it hasn't been implemented yet, was that there's actually a board that's got representative of other groups as well. So it's got representatives of the board of directors, representative of the players and the coaches, the admin staff, the SLO, the Sports Liaison Officer, the Disability Access Officer, fans representatives on there as well. So the fans are one voice on that, and that group sits and meets. And it's not the board of directors, but it gets sight of more than an ordinary fan gets sight of, and it's trusted to look at that in confidence and help shape decisions, so we make better decisions together. And I think that's that. It comes back to something I said at the start. The more people are making decisions, the less likely they are to get it wrong. If you leave it in the hands of one, they might get it wrong, and there'll be people will want to string them up from lampposts if they get it wrong, and that shouldn't happen. It's just somebody has made a bad decision, and they're still a good person, most of them. So if you involve more people in those decisions, you're less likely to make a bad decision. But if you do make a bad decision, people own it and say, well, actually, how do we recover from this? How do we learn from this? How do we get better and take that on board and do a better job of it? And it's a hard thing for a board of directors to do on their own, to get everything right and to keep everybody happy. So kind of letting us help. And the other bits beneath that are just conversations, just an open door, so we can have the kind of conversations we're already having and keeping that going.
Did they use the word agile, Alan? They seem like the kind of guys who would say we're trying to be agile. So
I don't remember them ever using the word agile to me, but I hear it so often that I kind of like tune it out, I think.
That's stock answer stuff. That's interesting in terms of that sort of like a kind of stakeholder sort of group, it's kind of all these different representatives. Is that something, does that happen elsewhere, kind of within sort of Scottish football? Are you aware of anyone else who's doing that?
There's things like that happen. So St John's, for example, have got a structured dialogue process. It's not as broad as the one I described there, and in its pure form, it started off as just a conversation between supporters and decision makers, owners of their club. So the pure form of it has been around for quite a while. Has that very, very kind of set agenda. One of the best ones out there is Fulham, and that's been going for a long time. So they have that structure in place for their supporters trust, and it's usually the supporters trust is the focal point of it. But I actually think we've got a very strong group in the Raith Forum, so it's not just one fans group. It's not the trust alone. It's all supporters groups that are in that, and I would kind of want to build on that to get that strong, as you say, stakeholder group. So all voices are heard, and all voices are equal there. So yeah, it exists in different forms around the place. Actually, Rangers last year, they improved their supporter engagement processes a lot. They brought in a whole bunch of new structures there and are doing fantastic work there. They've got loads and loads of resources to do that. They've got full-time staff managing that process and making sure that works well, linking into fans group, with which they have hundreds, and their supporter liaison officer and the supporter engagement team work on that. So there's loads of places where it happens really, really well that we can learn from. But it's not the norm yet. But I think it can only be a good thing. Actually, I remember one of the directors of Hearts talking about fan engagement. So they're fan owned, but he says, other owners of football clubs ask me about fan ownership. Is it worth it? And his answer is, show me a better way of keeping the fans engaged and keeping them in the loop. And their season ticket sales have gone. I keep on climbing. They stay consistently high, even if they're having a terrible time of it. And people are really, really grumbling. They're not happy, but they're still there. They're still engaged in it. So that guy is basically saying, yeah, for Hearts, it's not about the money. It's not about the ownership. It's about keeping people engaged, so people keep coming through the bad times as well as the good.
Yeah, I want to come back to Hearts in a second, but just because you mentioned it, and I meant to ask it earlier on, the Raith Forum, I think this is something that a lot of people hear about but don't necessarily understand what it is. Could you just define that for me, please?
So Raith Forum is just an informal group with representatives of all the kind of formal supporters organisations around the club. Fife's Finest, 200 Club, Macmillan Club, Supporters Club, ourselves, Rovers down south. I probably missed one. Nevers and Jory Monroe, but also representatives from the Community Foundation and Raith TV are invited along to that. So pretty much any kind of identifiable group of people that have got Raith Rovers at heart that come from the support are in that group. Meets fairly regularly, sometimes for just kind of like short catch-up chats, but sometimes for kind of longer meetings. Prior to the pandemic, we used to meet face-to-face, and we had quite a more closed membership. So it was any group that had a formal membership structure, so you could actually identify all your members, was invited around the table, and the ones that were a little bit looser or social groups, weren't invited into that, so we expanded that over that time. But that's just a group of people that kind of just chat, share what we're up to, and even as simple things like if we're doing a fundraiser, making sure the date doesn't clash with somebody else, or we're not doing the same idea as somebody else, or if we can do stuff together, we do that, like the Christmas raffle. Each of the groups kind of chip in with that and various things like that. That's really what the Raith Forum is. It used to be the network that the supporters director used to kind of like counsel them to gather confidential opinion. So if there's a topic coming up in the club board table, the supporters director would come to those 5 groups that were on at the time and saying, we've got this decision to make, what do you think about this? All in confidence, and then taken back into those conversations. We don't have that seat in the boardroom anymore, so it doesn't do that anymore. But Dot, who's still our representative that we elected, she still represents us for our 3-year term, and she has good contact with the club as well, and has got access to some conversations as well. So it's a way for Dot to ask questions of a larger group of people and say, what does this sound like to you? What do you think about this?
Excellent, good. Again, it's good to just have that level of engagement and that kind of breadth of opinions as well. So the point I want to mention about the Hearts, or the question I want to ask you, Hearts is the one that comes to mind, but I believe Motherwell are kind of similar. There are clubs that operate with this sort of fan ownership model or similar, where there is a sort of subscription model, so that there's money that's coming from the fan base that goes sort of into a formalised kind of supporter structure, first of all, and then sort of into the football club to protect or increase sort of an ownership. Now that, at least not to anywhere the same scale, isn't really the case with the Rovers. But what we do have is things like the football club itself now runs Club 1883. It's a kind of subscription model that's funding the football club. Do you think there has been any degree of sort of missed opportunity? Have the crises sort of come at the wrong time, where the kind of supporters as a whole have sort of missed out on an opportunity there to be funding more of a direct ownership?
I wouldn't call it a missed opportunity, but we did have an alternative plan that we were working on when John Sim kind of said that he was kind of interested in, he said privately and then said publicly about 6 months before the takeover that he was seeking investment. So we started working on an alternative plan, and it became quickly apparent that we wouldn't be able to compete with some of the other offers that were on the table, both in terms of raising money and an immediate influx of cash, which was the offer from some of the groups that apparently were talking to the club. So we couldn't compete with that, but we started putting a bit of shape to it from a Raith Rovers perspective rather than from a generic perspective. We drew up something that basically said, if you're going to make it work, you need a fairly long run up to it, and you need to not take over a club that's in a mess. So, looking back, the first clubs that went into fan ownership, it was done through crisis, and it was horrendously hard work, and it wasn't smooth process. But they all got there, and they're better in the long term. But it's not the ideal way to do it. You probably want to do it with 2 or 3 or 4 years run up to do it really, really well. And we identified there's 3 things you need to raise money for. One, to buy the shareholding in the first place, but then you need an operating budget, because the way that money comes into football clubs is not smooth across the 12-month period. It's peaks and troughs. So you need something just to smooth that out. And then the other thing you need to do, you need an emergency fund if things aren't going to plan. So if you find, despite your best intentions and your best plans, and you predict it to be finishing top 4, and you're actually, the best you can do is top 6, as you mentioned earlier, that's worth 200 grand less in prize money if you finish where Airdrie did versus where Raith Rovers are. And so what you're going to do to fill that £200,000 gap, or if you're perilously close to relegation and you just need a striker, so how are you going to you're going to rummage down the back of your sofa and find enough money to employ a John Fredrickson. If you actually kind of look high, you can get him to find
bad
it for
example,
you.
But I take the point.
but a fans group, unless they've had a long run up to do it, don't have that luxury of just easy or easier access to pretty decent amounts of cash in a hurry. So it's worth building up that fund and preserving that fund over a period of time. So we thought, right, if we're going to do this, we probably want a good run up to it. So it's one thing to talk to the current owners or the next owners or the next owners about. It's like, so can we be your exit plan? So that if you've got a 5-year plan of running this football club, can you sell it to us at the end of that, or exit it whatever way you want to exit? So we can implement this model, but with the benefit of hindsight that clubs in crisis don't have. And essentially, Hearts is a fantastic example of a fan-owned club. Financially, that generates a lot more money than the club would just do organically through just selling shirts and tickets and pies. They raised £1.5 million over and above, just that natural what people spend on going to the football every single season. But there's 8 clubs around Scotland, and they all raise more money than just comes in organically through to the club. They also do fan engagement well just by being fan owned, so their crowds tend to be a little bit higher or a little bit more resilient in the bad times, and that's worth an awful lot as well. So there's different, and the other thing is that those 8 clubs that are fan owned in Scotland all do it in a slightly different way from each other. There's a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences. There are things that are unique to each of them. So you can kind of pick and choose from each of those 8 models and say, well, maybe this is the one that would fit here, and that's best done in a conversation with the existing owner to say, well, if this is going to be your exit plan, let's work towards this together, and let's get this in the shape that would be a legacy for you. You can say, I've done a fantastic job here, where we've done this on the pitch, we've done this off the pitch, and now that legacy isn't going to be undone by a dafty coming and taking over the club. Because most clubs that get into a mess, it's under a single individual owner or a very small group of people who just get it wrong. Most of them aren't bad people, most of them aren't idiots, some of them are, but most of them are good, well-intentioned people who have the club at heart, but they're just too small a group of people, and they get things wrong, and their legacy is tarnished by that. They're remembered as the guy that put the club out of business or into administration or whatever. No one's erecting statues to them, but I think, and it's my big hope, is the owner that basically puts in place a thing that basically says this 141-year-old club is still going to be there in 141 years' time. They'll have statues in the town to basically remember what they did for us. And it's like, it doesn't have to be the current owners. If that's not what they want to do, that's absolutely fine. We'll continue developing that plan slowly, quietly in the background, so that when somebody's up for it, we can do it.
Good. That's good to hear. It's that kind of succession planning on a structural level. Because you're absolutely right. It's the kind of, the ownership has to go somewhere. Nobody, least of all football shareholders, lives forever. There's got to be something in place, and it's interesting to hear it actually kind of put that way around. That the inheriting a football club that is in crisis is inherently a very, very difficult thing to do, and that's when the opportunity has arisen in the past. But that doesn't need to say that's the only opportunity. And that's probably where I was thinking, to be honest. It's like, you look at the others, but there's nothing to say that it has to be done that way, or that, because that's not, it's not a desirable way.
The last 3 or 4 that have gone into fan ownership in Scotland have all done it that careful way, with a long lead up time. So Hearts were in crisis, but Anne Budge basically stepped in and bought the foundation of Hearts time so that they could take over when they were ready to do it. So that's exactly what was going on there for 8 years. St Mirren was the same. Gordon Scott basically said, well, I'll take the majority shareholding until you're ready. And then they were eventually ready. They did it. Morton did it a lot quicker than that, but it was a conversation with the Raith family, and they did it in something like 10 months, which was miraculous. Pretty difficult on the other side of it, but they're okay, and they're probably better than they were before. And Partick were the most recent one to do it, and it was, Colin Weir's kind of legacy was, I want this to go into the fans, but I want it to be in the right structure. So I'll put my shares in a trust, not a supporters trust, but the other kind of trust. I'll put them in the trust until the supporters organisations are ready to take over, which I think he thought would take 3 months, 6 months, to best part of 3 years before the trustees were ready to relinquish it and give it to the 2 fans organisations there. So it happens carefully, and that's kind of the model you need to go down to make that work. Actually, something that John Sims said to me a few years ago, he says, it's much easier to buy a football club than to sell it. And I think, the sort of beauty parade that was going on before the current owners took over was a lot of people saying, "I want to buy that football club," and John's like, "No, I don't want to let you get in here. I have to really believe in you in order to let this go, because otherwise I'm not going to be looked on kindly in Kirkcaldy by Raith Rovers supporters and the wider community." So it's difficult to sell one. It's dead easy because there's always a club that's in distress and the owners are just wanting it off their hands. So you could probably pick up Inverness for a song right now, but would you want it in that kind of mess? To sell it is a tougher job.
Yeah, seeing some of the characters who do get through the due diligence process really terrifies me as to the ones who get turned away.
Yeah.
That must be a real kind of motley crew of characters. Right, Alan, listen, I've taken up loads of your time. I really, really appreciate it. Well, a couple of final questions. So just to clarify, and I think I'm right on this because I've paid mine, membership currently £5?
£5 a year, that's right. Yeah.
So nice and cheap, nice and affordable. Sorry, I should have said. So
great value, you should have said.
That, yeah. Well, this is for you to pitch. I'm here to ask the questions. Yeah, so £5 a year, very, very good value. Presumably the trust is quite happy to accept donations over and above that £5 should people feel
yeah, that's right.
they wish to do so.
A lot of our members do that. There's a way of giving us a discretionary donation on top of that. It's very easy to do, but you're under absolutely no obligation to do so. We appreciate every single penny that's put into us. And we actually made that decision a long time ago to drop I think initially membership was £5 a month. We dropped down to £5 a year, knowing that some people would just continue to give us £5 a month or more. But also we wanted people to be members, even if they couldn't afford £5 a month. So whatever you've got, we'll happily take every penny off you. But we don't want that to be a barrier to people joining and having their voice heard.
Perfect. And it is, as you say, the trust fundamentally, it's a democratic body. It's one voice, one vote.
One member, one vote.
Stuff.
So if you put in just a £5 a year, you're just as important as the person who puts their hand deep in their pocket and gives us hundreds. Some people have given us a lot more than that over their lifetimes. But yeah, every member has exactly the same power in the organisation.
Fantastic. And if people do want to find out more, want to get details on how to join, where is the best place to find that information?
2 ways of doing it. Online is really easy. So go to raithtrust.org.uk and have a look there. And there's a page on there to allow you to join the trust. The other thing to do is come along and talk to us on a home match in the South Stand. So we're beside the pie stall that's nearest the main stand. It's in the South Stand, but the one opposite the 200 Club door and beside Jim McIntosh selling his 50-50 tickets. So kill two birds with one stone, give him a pound and give us £5 and join. Or if you just want to talk to us and ask us questions that I've not answered on the podcast tonight, come along and talk to us. And we're there most games. We're trying to get there more regularly. Some of the trust board live further away. Quite a few of the guys and girls have young families and can't get there every week. But we try and always have like one or two of us standing there. So you now look what we can see. So if you see me there, sometimes I've got a hat on so you can't see that mess. But I generally look quite like this. So just come and have a chat. Anything you want to know, or if you want to join, we'd be very, very happy to talk to you.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you very much, Alan. I really, really appreciate your time.
Really nice to talk to you.
Thank you everybody for listening as well. Now, Alan, there is of course an open invitation. You can come back on a Thursday or a Sunday and just talk shite with the rest of us.
Can I talk false nines and 4-2-3-1s?
Yeah, definitely talk 4-2-3-1s. Me and Scott will join you with that. Anytime you like. None of this 4-4-2 nonsense for us. We're modern men. Perfect. As I say, thank you very much. And we will see you again soon. Goodbye.